I'm very soft, so if you can move forward, I'd appreciate it. We were going to use a microphone, but unfortunately have been defeated by lack of electricity. So I'm going to make Walter do most of the speaking, in fact, because of this. But really happy to celebrate this important book here. And my thought when chatting to Walter beforehand about how we should do this was to first talk a little bit about his practice and then speak about how the book came about. So I was thinking that we might want to kick off with something looking at the kinds of themes that Walter works with. And for me, the most important work that started everything, I think, with his practice is Silverfish, an amazing work that he produced for a conference on the archive. And the silverfish is in fact this fish moth that eats up paper, that eats up household linen, and is in fact, when he made it, is human-sized. And ever since then, within your practice has been this kind of complication of the relationship between animals and humans. And I think that's really central to his practice. And I think embedded with it is a complication of the difference between self and other and complexities around that. So I thought it would be great if Walter began by talking about that.
Thanks, Brenda. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's spot on. That is a theme that has been throughout and is still very much part of what I'm doing in my work. And I think also the interdependency between animal and human and other life forms. So plants would also be part of that, although they might not feature as much. But certainly the animal-human interface has interested me a lot. And coming back to the fish moth, the silverfish. The fish moth is something tiny that we encounter in our kitchen cupboards, scurrying along. And I decided to make it on my body scale. So the body of the silverfish relates to my own human body. So it's a kind of one-to-one relationship that happens. And for this particular symposium that was taking place, in which questions about archiving were raised around how and what we catalogue, it seemed something quite pertinent, something quite, in a way, humorous as well. It's something quite absurd about making a big fish moth out of wire. And also the time that goes into making it is kind of, it doesn't quite fit, but there you have it. I also quite liked in terms of materials, the silverfish has a sort of powdery silver slipperiness to it. It's got a silver, not shininess, but there's something, and the aluminium wire has a similarity for me in that quality. Also the kind of knitting that I do with the wire creates a surface that is somewhat tactile. And what also happens when you enlarge a silverfish from this size to that size is that you become much more aware of what an amazing antenna they have. They have these incredible sensory feelers which extend out and on that scale become quite threatening looking, quite whip-like. And so what I kind of like to do in my work is to create an encounter of ambivalence. So you kind of see something familiar, and you've written about this in terms of my work, the familiar and the unfamiliar. You see something familiar, but there's also something that's not quite. So it sort of puts you a bit off the familiar. And that is also why that was quite an important work for me. That set off a whole range of other insects and other animals. The human-animal relationship, to talk a bit about that, I think we have become used to thinking of animals more like objects, like creatures that eat and reproduce whereas we as human beings think of ourselves as subjects, as we have language, we've got culture, we are cultured, we think of ourselves as superior in relation. And that kind of division is still very much around. And I think in terms of the fish moth as well, I think also there's a kind of revulsion that one feels when you see that creature. We've got an innate revulsion towards insects. Insects have, let's put it this way, they are the kind of the most alien other to us human beings. They are so different to us. And also the notion of becoming insect. I think you're all familiar with Franz Kafka's story of the Metamorphosis, which tells of the central character Gregor Samsa, who wakes up one morning shocked to find that he's been transformed into a bug. And the horror of that also expresses the kind of, the insect is something quite other, something quite, there's a wonderful German word that he uses in that book, Ungeziefer, which is, I don't think you can translate that in English. It's like such a strong word of this is vermin, this is really bad. This does not belong to society. Yeah, and in my later works, I've quite often joined or conjoined human with animals. So the figures that I've made that become almost armor-like are also animals. So there's this kind of dual thing going on where you can. What I also do in my work quite a lot is I leave them almost like shells. They almost look like skins that have been left behind, that some insects do when they molt. So, which for me also becomes a sort of opportunity for the viewer to imagine themselves occupying the inside, looking out. So it's a kind of from knowing from within what that creature. So there's a kind of empathy that I would like to think that the works might engender. And then also a kind of thinking of animal, let's put it as human. Let's think about our animality as humans, and let's also think about the humanality of the animals. That kind of duality that happens within. Yeah. Does it address the question?
I think it does. I think what's also really interesting is the political context in which they emerged. For me, it's quite interesting that silverfish and all its notions of othering happened a couple of years after the demise of apartheid in the context of Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And we don't think of your works as obviously political, but I think there is a political underpinning there, particularly in the notion of self-other, foreign, xenophobia, all those things. Yeah. So I think they have huge implications in terms of relevance. I don't know if you want to say anything about that as well. I agree with you. I mean, we kind of live in the century of the migrant, the other, these things are relevant. And as you say, I don't sort of think of myself as addressing those things directly, but I think implicitly they are there, I think, yeah. I wonder, you sort of started talking a little bit about the materials in silverfish, and I always find the materials in your work also really interesting, is that you use them in unexpected ways. So it's almost like you take materials we associate with sculpture and use them as if you were making a textile, weaving with wire, for example, taking things that are really inflexible and using them as if they are flexible. And I think your work often complicates notions of art, craft, perhaps also gender. I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit about your materials and their significance.
Yeah, I mean, wire is the main material that I use, and again, it comes back to, I think, to this ambivalent encounter that I like to make use of in my work. The wire, I use the wire in a way that is perhaps not quite expected. So wire, I think wire, if you think of wire, it's really like a hardware thread, or it's a bit like, well, it's kind of a boundary material. Wire is used to make fences. It's used to create inside and outside. It marks off spaces. It's something that doesn't really immediately say domestic in terms of craft. And that for me sparks something. So I've kind of found my own way of using the wire in a way that starts to reference those things, although I don't copy them. I don't know how to make lace. I have no idea, but I make my own kind of lace. So, using a thin piece of wire, I start knotting it so that it becomes a kind of repetitive, spiraling act that then becomes lace-like, let's put it that way. I would call my weaving, or what I would think of as weaving, as a kind of coiling as well. It's a bit like basket making, so it's a bit like wrapping, and I have a kind of rhythm of doing it where I start to count. You almost, it's a very meditative, very pleasurable activity, this weaving, where you very slowly build something up. And I just found the wire, also wire, if you bend a piece of wire, it stays bent. It's not like a piece of thread which would then flop and fall to the floor. You bend a piece of wire, it holds. That's what I think is the magic of it. And that, for me, has a kind of sculptural potential. When you do start weaving it, it has a kind of solidity to it. And it allows you to create shells and hollows and things. And so also the insect imagery made sense because they have these exoskeletons, they have these shell-like exteriors, and making the wire already does that. So in a way that's linked to the insect imagery, and for me that became an enriching aspect to explore further.
I remember having a conversation with you once. I'd always assumed when you did one of your works, because it's so labor intensive, that you'd have a complete plan at the beginning, and then you'd work through it. So it's almost like a completely conceptual process. And then you end up at the end with what you envisaged. At the beginning, it's just mechanical. But that doesn't happen at all. And you actually change your mind midway, and so on. I wonder if you can give some examples where you might have changed drastically what you were doing midway.
Yeah. I mean, the process of crafting by weaving is first of all, it's very sequential. You sort of start at one point, and it's like a spiral, and it carries on and on and on. And so, in a way, it does require you to be quite careful about proportion, if you're especially making a figure. And I usually start with the torso section, work downwards somewhat. Then it also gives me a sense of how the head must relate to that. And very often things go wrong. So and little bits and pieces end up in my lounge. I work in my lounge. My lounge looks a bit like a scrapyard, but I have these bits and pieces that get cut off occasionally, and they often spark off something new. So I would find a little head there and think, okay, no, it didn't work with this one, let's try and carry on with that one. So it's, this process of slowness, I think, of craft is very much a part of the way I think about where the work is going. It's kind of slow, it's deliberate, and it's drawn out. And there's always been this notion that craft is somehow mindless. It's something that you just do automatically and in a sort of mindless manner, which is totally wrong. I think being slow and deliberate, it even more requires a lot of thinking while you're doing it. So it's always a matter of repetitive making, and the sociologist Richard Sennett talks about the intelligent hand, the hand that in a way is almost ahead of the making. Through the repetitive action, the hand almost anticipates where it is going to go next. So the mind is always busy doing that. You're always working, but you're also stopping and monitoring. You're stopping and assessing where is it going. So it's a constant thinking all the time. And that can become a kind of conceptualizing input in your work. So it can make you make decisions along the way. It's not like, I do have an idea of what I want to make, but I'm open to what the process will tell me might happen along the way. It's not always clear cut. That's for me an important aspect of that, yeah.
Well, maybe we should get to the book, and it's been a long time in the making. Do you want to perhaps talk to us a little bit about how it came about?
Yes, yeah. Well, the book is really the culmination of I must always stop and think, the Eduardo Villa Extraordinary Award for Sculpture, which I was given in 2022, which was a nice surprise. And it's such a valuable thing to have, Richard. I fully agree with what you were saying. It is such a valuable document. Number one, it's hugely expensive to produce a book. Number two, it's so valuable to have the inputs of the people who were part of this. Sven and I met initially. I hadn't ever met Sven, so we were both new to each other. He came to my house and we spoke about what this might become. And the award had sort of three requirements, if I can call it that. The one was my own practice, to show my own practice, and I had 2 exhibitions in this space opposite here. And to also interact with an art audience about my work. And the second was to also have workshops and conversations with other people, with other artists. So I had a workshop with a group of students from UJ and UP who were really very energetic and participated in using the materials that the artists who we invited to participate used. So there were toothpicks, wire, clothes pegs were the main materials, and they came up with extraordinary things just with that. And also the notion of repetition. And we kind of thought about a list of artists we might invite. And top of my list were Usha Sijarim and Chris Soul, both of whom I knew from the university. Usha studied for her master's in our division at Wits University. And Chris Soul was one of our students. I actually also had him for a brief period as a tutor. And I love their work. I think both of them are extraordinary artists. They're still very much actively making art. And both of them work in a very similar way to which I work, in a sort of repetitive manner, but also quite differently. So we had some really great chats. I had great chats with them, which Sven then kindly transcribed. So in the book we have those interviews. And then later on, an artist by the name of Inga Somdiala came to do a residency here. I had never met him, I didn't know his work, but Sven told me about his paper foldings that he does with, mainly from pages from atlases, old atlases, and he makes these beautiful, beautiful little boats out of them, which he clusters together. So there's also this kind of repetitiveness in his work, and we included him in the grouping as well. And then, of course, Brenda, your essay, which creates a wonderful grounding to the earlier work of mine, appears at the beginning. And then Liz Burrows, also, we met quite often to talk about my later work. And we had really nice chats, and you came to my house and had a look, and that is also in the book. And then, Ashraf, you also kindly came, brought in your sorry, I have to relate that. Ashraf, when he agreed to do this writing, asked me if he could come and see my house and where I work. And I said, yes, I work in my house. So he came and he was aghast when he saw my my lounge. Messy, very, very untidy, unfortunately. But that's I always, and he said to me, oh, Walter, you are a hoarder. And I said, yes, it's professional hoarding. There's a point to it. It needs to be like that. Yeah, there's a wire everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, it's so wonderful to have all these contributions in the end. And I'm not going to say huge, big thank yous to everyone. There's too many people, but I have an acknowledgement section in which you are all listed. And I do want to say again, thank you so much, very, very much for all your input to this book. The book is the culmination.
Before we end, tell us a little bit about the title.
Oh, the title,
In
yes.
Time.
Yeah. The In Time, it's difficult to come up with the title. well, I found it difficult. I kind of wanted something that would link all of this together, and I thought that In Time says it in a way. I mean, it's not too unlike the In the Weave. I had a previous catalogue called In the Weave and the In Time. I mean, both of them speak about the immersiveness of this kind of making, the fact that we all know about the losing oneself in time. We talk about time flies when we are very actively busy with something. So it sort of speaks about that. But I also quite liked the musical association of when we speak of a musical in time. It's about a rhythm that you follow, and that also speaks about the kind of work that I do. It's a kind of pleasurable being in timeness that happens when you are working. So that was the crux of it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Everybody, thank you.